Welcome to the Cut Day episode of Dolphins in Depth, a podcast provided to you by the Miami Herald. I'm Miami Herald columnist Omar Kelly, and joining me right now from Cell Block 39, who has been locked in his cell all day doing roster transactions on Cut Down Day, is Barry Jackson. Welcome, Barry. Let's get right into it. There were a couple of surprises on the Dolphins 53-man roster release. I know this is probably out of left field, but the biggest surprise to me is that Blake Ferguson, who just got a new contract, is now unemployed, which leaves you without a long snapper going into the season opening game. I have no idea who's a long snapper. Maybe it's Andrew Myers. What was that young man's name who just made the team?
Andrew Myers, the UTEP center. Yeah,
maybe.
Well, I guess my question is, are you available to long snap?
I am not available.
But I will say this. This is an interesting idea about going without a long snapper on your 53 and merely rotating guys on your practice squad as elevations. You could get away with that. That preserves the opportunity to keep a young player like Andrew Meyer or Storm Duck, the two undrafted rookies who are kept. So you could actually get by rotating long snappers. I'm not saying that's advisable, but at least initially to start the season, you could do that and just sign a guy in your practice squad, elevate him for 2 weeks, and I think you'd be good in that case. So I'm not sure you need to necessarily have a long snapper on your 53 all season. Sort of a novel idea.
Nobody else does it.
Novel or crazy?
I don't know. Let's see if somebody claims somebody signs Blake Ferguson. That was a little bit wild to me. Didn't expect it. As you mentioned, Storm Duck makes the 53-man roster. That was something I kind of predicted yesterday with you, Barry. I think privately when I watched Storm Duck on special teams work, I was like, oh, this guy made the 53-man roster. Congratulations. So they continue that streak of having undrafted players make the 53-man, undrafted rookies making the 53-man roster. Congratulations to him. I don't think it's over for some of these young players who might be signed on the practice squad. Another surprise, Barry. No Jonathan Harris, no Neville Gallimore, who had his entire contract guaranteed by the Dolphins. So what do they do now? Brandon Peely makes the roster initially, but Barry, are you comfortable with what you're seeing on defensive line?
No, I'm not comfortable at all. So in March, they signed Benito Jones, who's hurt, but on the team. They eventually, over the first 6 weeks of free agency time, Tier Tart, who they realized wasn't a fit, called him a poor scheme fit and cut him. They signed Jonathan Harris, figured out that he wasn't good enough for their team. They signed Neville Gallimore, decided not to keep him. So the first month of free agent acquisitions to replace Raekwon Davis and Christian Wilkins, in my view, was a total failure. And I said at the time, and look, I have great respect for a lot of the things Chris Greer in the front office have done over the last 2 years. They've definitely upgraded the talent on the team. But I said in March, they are mishandling defensive tackle. This has to be a bigger priority. You can't let Christian Wilkins and to a lesser extent Raekwon Davis walk out the door without adequately replacing them. They did not adequately replace either. And even if Benito Jones gets healthy suddenly in the next week or two, remember, as we've noted, Pro Football Focus, you can say what you want about him. They study every play. They say Benito Jones was one of the worst defensive tackles in the league last year. So how in the world can you say that your team is better equipped to compete for Super Bowl when you are clearly worse on your defensive line and you're clearly worse on your offensive line without Connor Williams and without Rob Hunt? Now we'll get to that in a minute, but that's why I have grave concerns about this roster. I don't want to be Debbie Downer. I don't want to seem like I'm pushing on alarms or anything, but that's why I have serious concerns about this team.
Another surprise that we had, Barry, and I'm not disagreeing with any word that you just said. I think if you're going to look at this roster, you're going to look and you're just going to see that they're soft on the middle of your interior defensive line and soft on the middle of your offensive line. These are issues that have to be addressed before you even kick off on September 8th. And if you're banking on Calais Campbell playing nose tackle, even he's a 37-year-old man, that ain't going to last long. Another surprise that we saw was Eric Uzukama. Didn't make the 53-man roster, Barry. And
why give up on him? Why give up on him? He showed signs the last week.
He's injured, and they did not waive him injured. They did not designate him for IR. They just released him. And I don't know if there's a corresponding move in terms of, hey, maybe they plan to put him on the practice squad, so that's why they didn't waive him injured. I don't know what is going on there, Barry. Please explain this to me. Make it make sense when now you have two healthy receivers heading into your season opener against Jacksonville Jaguars, and that's Braxton Berrios, and I'm not even sure he's 100% healthy, and Malik Washington, your rookie.
Well, we'll obviously ask Chris Greer tomorrow. One of the few chances every year we get to talk to Chris Greer. We'll ask him about Ezukam on Wednesday. But I would not have given up on him despite the injury because of what we saw over the last couple of weeks in preseason, the 5 catches for 65 yards. We know the physical talent. We know how shorthanded they are at receiver. And also a 4th-round pick with that amount of talent to be able to only extract 39 offensive snaps from him in 2 years and 1 catch for 3 yards, terrible failure. Terrible failure, and you're beginning the year with 4 receivers. Berrios is your 3, Malik Washington is your 4. There's no way they go into the opener with only those 4. They're obviously going to either sign a veteran to the 53 or sign someone to the practice squad and elevate them, whether it's Terrace Marshall, whether it's Robbie Chosen, who was cut by San Francisco. There are veterans out there that they can easily add to the practice squad and elevate. But giving up on Ezukam this soon seems to me to be a mistake. We should get clarity from this from Chris Greer tomorrow. So tell me this. I've been very negative the first 10 minutes of the podcast, which I don't like to be. Do you think I'm being overly alarmist, or do you share the serious concerns about this roster? Now that we have the 53, do you share concerns like I do, or do you think I'm being a little too alarmist?
I will give you a tease, Barry. In my Miami Herald breakdown of the 53-man roster, my opening line, my lead was, I hope Chris Greer kept his receipts for this offseason spending spree, because we're taking it all back. I don't know. You have 3 areas that tremendously concern me. Wide receiver. I know who the top 2 are. Odell Beckham going on the PUP, which should be no surprise to anybody. I know Mike McDaniel said, hold on. Wait a minute. I think they were just looking for permission from Odell Beckham. That doesn't surprise me. You've heard Tua sounding alarms. I don't know him. He's a stranger danger. I don't know I have never thrown a pass to him. That's going to take some time. I'm at the point where Odell Beckham, maybe week 6, maybe after the bye, but let's put that over there. Braxton Berrios is okay. I don't know if he makes 15 teams, 53-man roster. And that's your number 3 receiver. And then you've got Malik Washington. And he was okay for training camp. Now, sure, he's got a ton of upside. Maybe he's learning. Maybe he plays faster when he adjusts and learns. And the offense is a very complicated offense to learn and grasp and digest. But Jalen Waddle's hurt. Tyreek Hill's hurt. And you've got 2 receivers on the 53-man roster. What are you doing? Because you got to do something. I don't know if Robbie Chosen's coming back. I have absolutely no idea what they're doing, but I'm very curious to watch it. Then the defensive line. Okay, Brandon Peely is your answer. You got concerns. You got issues everywhere. Brandon Peely is your answer. Deshaun Hand, clearly, he's earned a roster spot. I thought he's had a very strong camp considering where he's come from. Yes, we can count on Calais Campbell. Yes, we can count on Zach Sealer. But I think you need at least 4. Don't you, Barry? You need at least 4 defensive linemen.
I'm curious to see how Brandon Peely does in regular season games. He's earned the opportunity. And so we'll see. We'll see if the combination of Benito Jones and some Calais moving inside to nose and Brandon Peely and Deshaun Hand is good enough to give them what Christian Wilkins and Raekwon Davis gave them last year. And obviously Calais is going to be the one largely replacing Christian Wilkins. I'm dubious if it will be, but Brandon Peely's had a good camp. He deserves a chance, and let's see what Benito Jones can do when he's healthy. I cited, obviously, the metrics in Detroit last season, but he's a try-hard player. Who knows? Maybe he'll be as good as Raekwon Davis. It's certainly not out of the question. So that's one concern. I would say with receiver, I share your concern about receiver, and I would say it was very interesting they opted to keep 5 inside linebackers and sacrifice that 5th receiver, whether it was Ezukama, whether it was Braylon Sanders, who has a groin injury. So basically, you're opting to keep 5 inside linebackers, a 4th tight end to Tanner Connor, and a 10th offensive lineman in Andrew Meyer over a 5th receiver. Could that change tomorrow? Absolutely. It wouldn't shock any of us if one of these guys is cut tomorrow and replaced with a wide receiver.
Not only that, but I think also maybe contributing to the Gallimore and Jonathan Hand decision was the fact that, hey, we guaranteed their whole contracts. If somebody signs them, that comes off our books. Or if somebody, or we could sign. No, you can't, because one of them, Gallimore's contract is fully guaranteed, but they could sign him at week 2 and pay him. I'm sure it's offset language, and pay him week to week. So there's all kinds of tricks and mechanisms that team use to spare money, spare change, and spare money and nickel and dime players. Tanner Connor is a very interesting. I like Tanner. I'm a fan.
I do too.
I could not ignore what I saw during training camp. I think he belongs on the 53-man roster. If there was one player that I worried about somebody else claiming, it was Tanner Connor. I've said that on this podcast. So that doesn't surprise me that he's kept for now. Is he safe? No. I think he could easily be put on the practice squad as the process continues to go along. They basically got 4 players, including the fullback Alec Ingold, that could play that full tight end, H-back, 2 tight end sets kind of situation. Let me get your take on this. Jeff Wilson over Chris Brooks.
What a difficult decision. To me, Wilson has simply earned the trust of Mike McDaniel. I would think Chris Grier probably deferred to McDaniel on this. They've been together 6 years. We saw when tough yards were needed in that key December game against Dallas, as you and I talked about on the podcast yesterday, Jeff Wilson was there. He answered the bell. And to me, he's been a trustworthy player. I know he's been beat up some over the last couple of years, but to me, he earned the benefit of the doubt. And it's not like they opted for a healthy Chris Brooks over Jeff Wilson. Chris Brooks, besides being in concussion protocol, he seemed to have some upper body injury that he sustained on that 59-yard run against Washington in the second preseason game. So Jeff Wilson over an unhealthy Chris Brooks does not bother me at all. I don't know who's going to be clamoring to sign an unhealthy Chris Brooks. Was that a decision that you were okay with?
I was okay with it. I'm a Jeff Wilson fan. My rule, Barry, if I'm not worried about anybody claiming Chris Brooks, and even if they did claim him, I get another shot at him. I get some opportunity. It makes sense. I just thought Chris Brooks would make it because he's a better special teams contributor. So, but maybe Jeff Wilson is going to be contributing a little bit more on special teams, especially with the new rules changes. To me, Barry, the biggest surprises are, what's the kid's name? I don't even know his name. Andrew Meyer. I mean, we got center issues all over the team.
Yeah. He lost his quarterback just a few days into camp with Gavin Hardison, but they like their young offensive linemen and their young corners who are undrafted. They make investments in these guys after the draft, and they usually like to keep 1 or 2 of them. Now, Meyer at least gives them a natural backup center if he's here September 8th on the 53, which is anyone's guess. But for now, he's a natural backup center behind Liam, who obviously is best as a guard. Jack Driscoll has been the backup center with Aaron Brewer out. So it's been Liam 1, Driscoll 2. Driscoll's not a good fit at center. We saw him against Vita Vea in a very bad matchup last week. So at least with Andrew,
that would have been a bad matchup for anybody. That would have been a bad matchup for anybody.
So I can understand the thinking, but I guess we have to see, is Andrew Meyer still on the 53 a week from now? Because if they make a waiver claim on anyone by the noon deadline tomorrow, Andrew Meyer logically would be one of the top 3 or 4 that would seem most expendable.
Yeah. So do you think that Blake Ferguson's going on practice squad? Is that what we're doing?
I have not looked into it yet because we were rushing to finish our stories and to do this pod, but I guess we'll get clarity on that from Chris Grier tomorrow. Yeah, certainly an odd decision to part ways with your reliable long snapper, but it would seem to me that the guys who they kept, they felt there was a risk with the young guys cutting, right? With Meyer and Storm Duck in particular. So I figured he was just the guy that figured was most expendable. But we should have more to share with viewers certainly tomorrow on Twitter and on the podcast after Chris Grier addresses all of this tomorrow at 1:45.
Yeah. So let me get your take, Barry. Make a prediction. Who was the last guy on and who was the first guy off the 53-man roster?
I would hope the first guy off was Ezukama, because to me, giving up on that talent at a position of need was a mistake. So I hope it was him. I don't know if it was him. I would say last on probably Tanner Connor and Andrew Meyer, I would say, because there really wasn't necessarily a need to keep a 10th guy, a center, an undrafted rookie who's probably not going to play. But they must see something they like there with the talent. I have to tell you, Omar, I feel worse about this team today than I did yesterday. and I'm not entirely sure why. But to me, looking at their final roster, I think, look, this is a team with really good top-end talent at certain positions. They've got 2 elite wide receivers. They've got a very good quarterback. They've got very good running backs. They have they're pretty good inside linebackers. They've got 2 very good edge rushers when they're healthy. Bradley Chubb, who's not healthy yet, and Jalen Phillips. They've got one of the best corners in the world in Jalen Ramsey. They've got a young safety on the cusp of a Pro Bowl in Javon Holland if he's fine. And they have obviously 2 good defensive linemen in Sealer and Campbell. So that's the good news. That's why they're going to be a playoff contender. But I look at the holes, the underbelly in this roster: nose tackle, outside linebacker beyond Phillips and Chubb, the other safety spot opposite Holland. Not that Poyer can't play. Poyer's been a wonderful safety in the league over the last 10 years, but we don't know what we're getting with a player at that age.
Not great at coverage.
Beyond Ramsey, I think Kendall Fuller's going to be fine, but then there's serious questions about, will Cater Cohu be the guy he was as a rookie, or will he be the guy that allowed 133 passer rating last year? We don't know what Ethan Bonner is. Offensive line, huge questions at both guard spots and at center. And Tehran never plays 17 games. So to me, I have deep concerns about this roster. They very well could be a playoff team, but I have to tell you something. If this team is 7-10, and I'm hoping they're not, lifelong South Floridian, grew up a Dolphins fan, if they're 7-10, I'm not going to be shocked. I hope that's not the case. I'm not going to be shocked, because to me, there are too many soft spots in the underbelly of this roster, too many question marks, too many durability issues, and it gives me grave concern going into the season. Again, I ask you again, am I being too much of an alarmist?
No, you're not. I look at this season as 2 things can impact it. 2 is performance, and I think he's going to take another step forward as he has every single season. And then health. Health of the entire team. Health, you lose Sealer or Campbell, your season is going to be rough. You lose Jalen Ramsey, your season is going to be rough. You lose one of your starting linebackers, even though you've got 3 inside linebackers I'm referring to. It's going to be tough sledding. And I could say the same thing for offense. I mean, God, could you even imagine losing Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle for half a season? To me, it's going to come down to coaching and leadership. And you got to get some favor by the health gods. But do I like where they are from a depth standpoint? And I say this every year, and Dolphin fans call me out for it every year. But no, you don't. I've always said your team is only as good as your weakest links. And right now, your weakest links are Brandon Peely, Liam Eichenberg, Lester Cotton, David Long, who can't cover in coverage, and Chop Robinson. No disrespect, but if you put him on the field, everybody's going to be running at him. Can those players?
Can this team possibly set the edge
in a year?
I'm sorry, Omar. One thing I was going to ask you: if Jalen Phillips is on a pitch count and is playing only 15 or 20 snaps in the opener, who's going to set the edge on this team? Right? I mean, as you said, they're going to run right at Chop. That's right. But if he's on a pitch count and isn't playing a lot, right. So that to me is as big concern as any. Yeah.
Unfortunately, Jalen Phillips is going to be off the field on 3rd downs because Chop Robinson can't play on the early downs. And Quentin Bell's probably a little bit better on setting the edge. So to me, it's going to be Emmanuel Ogbah and probably, maybe Jalen Phillips goes to the other side. I don't know which side Chop goes on, but maybe Jalen Phillips can't play 30 snaps a game, or we're thinking he can't play 30 snaps a game. But right. you bring up a great problem to try to figure out some answers to. But tomorrow, I'm looking forward to that conversation with Chris Greer, just because, he laughed at our face when we basically, you guys are way more concerned about the offensive line than I am. And lo and behold, they are going into the season right now, especially with Aaron Brewer having that last race on his hand, with the exact same offensive line that rushed to his operation the entire end of the month. And to the point where Tua says, hey, brother, I don't worry about it. I get the ball out of my hand quickly. Well, I don't want my quarterback to have to be rushing. And right. I don't want to have a call in offense where I have to throw out all 5 and 7-step drops, the 7-step drop plays, just because my quarterback can't be protected. So this isn't ideal. My hope is that there's another domino falling somewhere, and that they're going to go out there and be aggressive and pursue veteran players that, teams maybe cut because they didn't want to guarantee their contract for the entire season. It's not over yet in terms of roster building, but right now, am I pleased with where the Dolphins roster is? Not really, but
no. Two things we have to touch on that we haven't yet. Your thoughts on Nick Needham being out today? To me, maybe he was one of the first out. And then Odell Beckham going on PUP will miss 4 games. Thoughts on each of those?
Odell Beckham, not a surprise to a flat out address the issue. I don't have any chemistry with him. I don't think that doesn't happen in a week. It doesn't happen in 2 weeks. It doesn't happen overnight. And then Nick Needham, man, I saw that coming a mile away. I hated it for Nick just because he's such a important, popular player. However, I saw it coming. You just wasn't getting enough snaps at safety. They weren't testing him on the edge of the cornerback. He was playing nickel. Now I'm curious who's the backup nickel. Is it Jalen Ramsey? Is it Javon Holland? It's going to be interesting to see how those things shake out. This is a new team, new roster. Maybe Storm Duck. Maybe it's Ethan Bonner. I've seen Ethan Bonner in the dime position, so maybe nickel is something that he can play. I think he's going to be a big player on special teams. So, man, it's going to be interesting to see how this roster shakes up, and looking forward to hearing from Chris Greer tomorrow.
Yeah, and I have one other thought. With Beckham obviously out for at least 4 games, when Waddle and Hill aren't available on a particular route, if they're out of the game, if they're seeing 2 high safeties, if they're being doubled, your third option now is clearly not a receiver. It's either Ashan or Mostert, or it's Jonnu Smith, right? And I guess Durham Smythe at times. Are you comfortable with that? Does the fact that you have these options at tight end and running back as receiver options, does that at all mitigate the concern to you about not having healthy depth at receiver with Beckham and Craycraft out?
I only worry about that number 3 receiver when I'm facing something like a 3rd and 8 or longer, a 3rd and 13. I think if you put the 2 tight ends on the field, I think the 2 tight end package is going to be their base package. I think you're going to see probably about 500 snaps of that, especially earlier in the season, while Odell Beckham sort of gets into a groove and finds a comfort zone. People forget that Durham Smythe was a number 3 receiver on this team. And so he's no slouch. Then you've got Alec Ingold. Then you got Jonnu Smith, who's definitely a dynamic slot-esque weapon, just like Mike Gesicki was, except he's got better run after catch skills. I'm fine with that. And Braxton Berrios in the slot, dropping down in zones. I think it can hold you. Now, is it the upgrade that you had hoped for when you signed Odell Beckham? Absolutely not. But it seems like this pre-existing issue that he has, and I suspect no proof, no verification, but pre-existing issue. Everybody knows Odell Beckham has had knee issues. If he's had another cleanup procedure and it's taken him a minute to get back to where he was, this could be something that derails him for at least half a season. So hopefully it's not, and hopefully he's going to progress. But either way, I think they'll be fine. I'm surprised about Uzukama's release. Shocked about it, in fact. And let's hope that Malik Washington is ready to step up and contribute in all facets of the game.
Yeah, and I guess also my sense with this is, and every GM is like this, you have to justify your draft picks the year you draft him, right? I mean, would anyone suggest that Malik Washington or Patrick McMorris is better equipped to help the Dolphins now than Eric Ezukama if he were healthy and Nick Needham? The answer is no. And that's nothing against McMorris, who's, a later round pick. You can't have high expectations for him. Played well in one of the preseason games. It's nothing against Washington, who had 3 chunk plays in the last preseason game and came along nicely as preseason went on. But clearly, you're going to stick with your late round picks because it looks really bad to your owner if you cut your rookies 5 months after drafting them. No? I mean, and we've seen high picks like the Vikings first round or second round safety who was cut signed today. And there are other higher picks cut, but you never see it happen the first year. You never see it 5 months after the draft. So I think that sort of compels the Dolphins to keep all of those guys.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens and what comes about with the Dolphins during the week, whether there are claims, whether there are signings. And Chris Greer will have to answer the questions. Why wasn't the interior of the offensive line addressed? And we'll have that for you tomorrow on the Miami Herald. On that note, we are out, and we will see you tomorrow.